The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty mercantile, and Katherine Carson pressed her gloved hand against the window, peering through the grime at a town that looked nothing like the photographs she had been sent. Bonanza, Colorado was supposed to be a thriving mining community with well-kept streets and decent folk. But what she saw through that dirty glass was a collection of weathered buildings, false-fronted shops leaning at precarious angles, and mud-caked streets that suggested the recent spring rains had turned everything into a quagmire. The year was 1878, and Katherine had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Philadelphia to marry a man she had never met, a mine foreman named Gerald Hutchins, who had promised her a comfortable life in his letters, complete with a 2-story house and servants to help with the housework. The driver yanked open the door, and a cloud of red dust swept inside, coating Katherine's dark green traveling dress and settling into the folds of her bonnet. She coughed, covering her mouth with her handkerchief as she accepted the driver's weathered hand and stepped down onto the street. Her leather boots sank slightly into the mud, and she steadied herself against the coach, looking around for any sign of the man who was supposed to meet her. "You all right there, miss?" the driver asked, hauling her trunk down from the roof with a heavy thud. "You got someone meeting you?" "I am supposed to be meeting my intended," Katherine said, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "Mr. Gerald Hutchins. He should be here." The driver scratched his grizzled beard and glanced around the mostly empty street. "Hutchins, you say? Mining man?" "Yes, he is a foreman at one of the silver mines." Something flickered across the driver's face, an expression Katherine could not quite read, pity perhaps or concern. "Well, I got another delivery to make at the assay office." "You wait here with your trunk, and I will ask around about this Hutchins fellow." Katherine nodded, though unease settled in her stomach like a stone. She had left everything behind in Philadelphia after her father died, leaving her with debts she could never repay on a seamstress's wages. Gerald's letters had been kind, if somewhat formal, and he had sent money for her passage without hesitation. She had convinced herself that marrying a stranger was preferable to destitution, that love could grow from respect and companionship. Now, standing alone on this muddy street with the Colorado sun beating down mercilessly and sweat beginning to dampen her collar, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. 20 minutes passed, then 30. The driver returned, his expression grave. "Miss, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but Hutchins died 3 weeks ago. Cave-in at the mine, killed him and 2 others instantly." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Katherine gripped the edge of her trunk, her knees threatening to buckle. "Dead." "But I received a letter from him just 6 weeks ago." "I am sorry, miss, real sorry. The mine office said they tried to send word, but I guess it did not reach you in time." He shifted uncomfortably. "You got family back east you can return to?" Katherine shook her head slowly. There was nothing back east except her father's creditors and the tiny room she had shared with 2 other seamstresses. She had used the last of her money for new dresses and traveling necessities, believing she would not need funds once she arrived. The return ticket Gerald had promised to keep on hand for emergencies would never materialize now. "I need to find work," she said, forcing the words past the tightness in her throat. "Is there a boarding house? Somewhere inexpensive?" The driver looked doubtful. "Old Mrs. Fletcher runs a place on the north end of town, but I do not know if she is taking boarders right now. Mining towns are rough, miss. Not much work for a lady, if you understand my meaning." Katherine understood perfectly. She was not naive enough to miss his implication. "I can sew. I was a seamstress in Philadelphia. Surely someone needs alterations or mending." "Maybe." He did not sound convinced. "There is a Chinese laundry that might need help, and the hotel sometimes needs cleaning girls." He hefted her trunk. "Come on, I will take you to Mrs. Fletcher's place." "It is on my way." They walked through the muddy streets, Katherine doing her best to keep her skirts out of the worst of it while the driver carried her trunk on his shoulder. Men loitering outside the saloons watched her pass with undisguised interest, and she kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, her spine rigid with determination not to show fear. The boarding house turned out to be a narrow two-story building with peeling white paint and a sagging front porch. Mrs. Fletcher was a stern woman with iron-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She listened to Katherine's situation with pursed lips and suspicious eyes. "I got one room left, but it is $5 a week, paid in advance. No men visitors, no noise after 9 o'clock, and you keep your own room clean." "I do not have $5, Katherine admitted, her cheeks burning with humiliation. "But I can sew. I could make curtains or repair linens or alter clothing in exchange for a room until I find paid work." Mrs. Fletcher's expression softened marginally. "Let me see your hands." Katherine removed her gloves, revealing hands that were slender but marked with the tiny scars and calluses of someone who had spent countless hours with needle and thread. Mrs. Fletcher examined them briefly, then nodded. "You can stay 3 nights while you look for work. You will mend every sheet and pillowcase in this house, and if your work is good, we will discuss an extended arrangement. But I warn you, girl, jobs for respectable women are scarce in Bonanza. Most women here are either married to minors or working in places you do not want to work." "I understand. Thank you, Mrs. Fletcher." The room was barely larger than a closet, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single small window that overlooked the alley. Katherine sat on the edge of the bed after the driver and Mrs. Fletcher left, still wearing her dust-covered traveling clothes, and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to cry. She wept for her father, for the life she had left behind, for the stranger whose death had left her stranded in this harsh place, and for the fear that coiled in her chest like a living thing. When the 5 minutes ended, she dried her eyes, removed her bonnet, and began to unpack her trunk. She had not come 2,000 miles to surrender to despair. She would find work, she would earn her keep, and she would survive. She had survived her mother's death when she was 12, her father's slow decline, and the grinding poverty of Philadelphia's tenements. She could survive this too. The next morning, Katherine woke before dawn and spent an hour brushing the dust from her clothes and repairing a torn hem. She pinned her dark blonde hair into a neat bun, put on her least worn dress, a modest gray cotton with a white collar, and went downstairs to begin her work on Mrs. Fletcher's linens. The pile of mending was enormous, sheets worn thin in the centers, pillowcases with split seams, and tablecloths with ragged edges. Katherine sat up near the window in the parlor where the light was best and lost herself in the familiar rhythm of needle and thread. By afternoon, she had completed half the pile and earned a grudging nod of approval from Mrs. Fletcher, who brought her a plate of bread and cheese. "You work fast and neat. That is good. There is a seamstress shop on Main Street run by a woman named Della Morris. She could use an assistant, though I hear she is particular about who she hires. You should try there tomorrow." "I will. Thank you." Katherine worked until the light faded, then climbed the stairs to her small room and collapsed on the bed, her fingers aching. She fell asleep still wearing her dress, too exhausted to change. The following day, she finished Mrs. Fletcher's mending by noon and walked into town to find Della Morris's shop. It was a neat little storefront with a painted sign reading "Fine Dressmaking and Alterations." Katherine took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and pushed open the door. The shop was empty except for a plump woman with graying auburn hair who was bent over a sewing machine, guiding emerald green silk through with expert precision. She looked up as the bell over the door chimed. "Help you. My name is Katherine Carson. I am a seamstress from Philadelphia and I am looking for work. I can do alterations, create patterns, and I have experience with both hand and machine sewing." Della Morris set down her work and studied Katherine with shrewd eyes. "Philadelphia, you say? What brings you to Bonanza?" Katherine had prepared her answer. "I came to marry, but my intended passed away before I arrived. Now I need work." "You the one who was supposed to marry Gerald Hutchins?" "Yes," Della nodded slowly. "I heard about that terrible thing. Mining is dangerous work." She gestured to a basket of garments in the corner. "See that brown wool dress on top? The hem needs to be let down 2 inches, and there is a tear in the sleeve that needs invisible mending. Show me what you can do." Katherine worked for the next hour while Della continued with her own projects. When Katherine finished, she brought the dress over for inspection. Della examined every stitch with a critical eye, then looked up at Katherine with something approaching respect. "You are good. Real good. Problem is, I barely have enough work to keep myself fed in this town. Most of the women here make their own clothes or buy ready-made from the mercantile. I get maybe 5 or 6 orders a month, mostly from the mine owner's wife and the banker's daughters. I cannot afford to pay an assistant." Katherine's heart sank. "I see. Thank you for your time. Wait." Della set down the dress. "I did not say I would not help you. Here is what I can do. When I get orders I cannot handle alone, I will hire you by the piece, and I will spread word that you are available for private mending and alterations. Women can come directly to you at Mrs. Fletcher's place. It would not be steady work, but it might be enough to get by. I would be grateful for anything. You seem like a decent girl who has had some bad luck. I will do what I can." Della paused. "But I will be honest with you, Katherine. This is a hard town for a single woman. Men outnumber women 10 to 1 here, and most of them have been in the mountains too long. You watch yourself, especially after dark." "I will. Thank you, Mrs. Morris." Katherine left the shop with a small measure of hope. It was not much, but it was something. She spent the rest of the afternoon walking through town, introducing herself to shopkeepers and asking about work. The mercantile owner said he would keep her in mind if his wife needed sewing help. The hotel manager looked her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl and offered her a job cleaning rooms for $2 a week. She accepted, knowing she had little choice. That evening, as she walked back to the boarding house in the fading light, she heard shouting coming from the livery stable. A crowd had gathered, and Katherine should have kept walking, but curiosity pulled her closer. Through the cluster of men, she could see 2 figures in the stable yard, circling each other with raised fists. "$20 says Tucker puts him down in under a minute," someone called out. "You are on. That drifter has a good 50 pounds on him." Katherine tried to push through for a better look, but the crowd was too thick. She caught glimpses of the fighters. One was a heavy-set man with a black beard, the other taller and leaner with dark hair and broad shoulders. They were fighting in earnest, fists connecting with sickening thuds. The crowd roared approval. Then the tall man landed a devastating punch to the bearded man's jaw, and he went down like a felled tree. The crowd erupted in mixed cheers and groans as money changed hands. The victor stood over his opponent, breathing hard, blood trickling from a cut above his eye. "Anyone else want to try their luck?" he called out, his voice rough but steady. No one stepped forward. The man grabbed a ladle from the water barrel nearby and dumped it over his head, washing away the blood and sweat. It was then that Katherine got her first clear look at him. He was perhaps 30 years old, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that curled slightly when wet. His face was angular, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. His shirt was torn, revealing a muscled chest marked with old scars. But it was his eyes that caught Catherine's attention. Pale gray, like winter sky, watchful and intelligent despite the violence he had just engaged in. Those eyes found hers in the crowd, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. Catherine felt her breath catch. Then someone jostled her from behind, and she stumbled forward, barely catching herself before she fell into the mud. The gray-eyed man moved fast, crossing the distance between them in 3 strides and catching her elbow to steady her. "Careful, miss. You all right?" Up close, he was even more striking, despite the bruising beginning to darken his cheekbone. He smelled of sweat and horses and something else, something indefinably masculine that made Catherine's heart race. "I am fine, thank you," she managed, pulling her arm gently from his grasp. Her skin tingled where he had touched her, even through the fabric of her sleeve. "You should not be watching fights," he said, not unkindly. "This is not the sort of entertainment for a lady." "I was not watching. I was merely passing by." A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Then you might want to keep passing. These fellows get rowdy after the betting is done." He was right. The crowd was already dispersing, many of the men heading toward the saloons with their winnings or to drown their losses. Catherine nodded her thanks and hurried away, very aware that the gray-eyed man watched her until she turned the corner. Back in her room, she could not stop thinking about him. It was foolish, she told herself sternly. He was probably a drifter or a troublemaker, exactly the sort of man she should avoid. She had not come all this way to end up with a man who solved his problems with his fists. But when she closed her eyes that night, she saw those winter-gray eyes looking at her with concern, felt the steady strength of his hand on her elbow, and something warm unfurled in her chest despite her best efforts to ignore it. The next few days fell into a pattern. Catherine cleaned rooms at the hotel each morning, returned to the boarding house to work on any mending she had been hired to do, and spent her evenings altering Mrs. Fletcher's worn linens in exchange for her room. It was exhausting work, and she fell into bed each night with aching muscles and pricked fingers, but she was surviving. She even managed to save a few dollars. On her 4th day in Bonanza, she was scrubbing the floor of a hotel room when she heard a commotion in the hallway. Raised voices, heavy footsteps, and then the hotel manager appeared in the doorway, followed by the gray-eyed man from the fight. "This is the room," the manager said. "We keep it clean and the bed linens are fresh every week. $2 a week if you want it, Mr. Thorne." "I will take it." The man's voice was deep and gravelly. He reached into his pocket and counted out bills, handing them over. Only then did he notice Catherine, still kneeling on the floor with her scrub brush. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Miss." Catherine nodded politely and returned to her work, very aware of his presence in the doorway. She heard the manager give him a key and explain the house rules, but she did not look up again until they both left. Her heart was hammering in her chest for no good reason. That evening, as she carried her basket of finished mending down the hotel stairs to deliver to the mercantile owner's wife, she nearly collided with someone in the narrow hallway. Strong hands caught her shoulders to steady her, and she found herself looking up into those winter-gray eyes again. "We have to stop meeting like this," Thorne said, and there was definite amusement in his voice now. "I am going to start thinking you are doing it on purpose." Catherine felt her cheeks warm. "I assure you I am not. Excuse me." She tried to step past him, but the hallway was too narrow, and he did not move aside immediately. They stood there for a moment, closer than propriety allowed, and Catherine could see the bruise on his cheekbone had faded to a yellowish purple. The cut above his eye was healing cleanly. "I am Thaddeus Thorne," he said. "Since we keep running into each other literally, we might as well be properly introduced. Katherine Carson." She shifted her basket to her other hip. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have a delivery to make." This time he stepped aside, but as she passed him, he said, "I have a shirt that needs mending. Tore it in that fight the other night. I hear you are the best seamstress in town." "The only seamstress currently taking work," Katherine corrected. "You can leave it at the front desk, and I will collect it tomorrow." "Much obliged." She felt his eyes on her as she walked away, and it took all her self-control not to look back. The shirt appeared at the front desk the next morning, wrapped in brown paper. It was a good quality cotton shirt, dark blue, with a tear across the back shoulder and missing 2 buttons. Katherine brought it back to her room and examined it carefully. The fabric was worn but clean, and she could smell wood smoke and leather, and that same indefinable scent she had noticed before. She told herself she was being ridiculous as she selected thread that matched perfectly and began to repair the tear with tiny, invisible stitches. She told herself it was merely professional pride that made her take extra care with the work, replacing all the buttons instead of just the missing ones because the others were loose and would soon fall off anyway. She told herself that the strange flutter in her stomach had nothing to do with Thaddeus Thorne and everything to do with the beans she had eaten for lunch. She was lying to herself, and she knew it. 2 days later, she was returning the repaired shirt to the front desk when Thaddeus came down the stairs, dressed for riding in worn denim pants and a leather vest. He stopped when he saw her. "Is that my shirt?" "Yes. The tear is mended and I replaced all the buttons. They were coming loose." He took the shirt from her and examined her work, running his fingers over the repair. His hands were calloused and scarred, the hands of a man who worked hard for his living. "This is fine work. Real fine. What do I owe you? 50 cents. He pulled out $1 and pressed it into her hand. "Keep the change. You earned it." Before she could protest, he added, "I am heading out to my place now. I bought some land east of town, planning to build a horse ranch. Got a temporary shelter up, but I need proper stables and a house before winter." "That sounds like ambitious work for one man." "It is, but I have been drifting for 10 years and I am tired of it. Time to put down roots." He studied her face. "What brought you to Bonanza, Miss Carson, if you do not mind my asking?" She gave him the same answer she had given Della Morris. His expression softened with what looked like genuine sympathy. "That is a hard piece of luck. This town is not easy on its own, let alone for someone who just lost their future. I am managing. I can see that." He folded the shirt over his arm. "Well, I will likely need more mending soon enough. Ranch work is hard on clothes. I will be here." He tipped his hat to her and headed out the door. Katherine watched him go, then looked down at the $1 in her hand. She should have insisted he take the change, but he was already gone, and she needed the money too badly to chase after him. Over the next 3 weeks, Katherine's life in Bonanza began to feel less temporary. She had steady cleaning work at the hotel, a growing list of mending clients, and Della Morris had hired her for 2 large dressmaking projects that paid well. She was even able to buy fabric for a new dress of her own, the first new clothes she had owned in over a year. And she kept running into Thaddeus Thorne. He seemed to be everywhere. She would see him at the mercantile buying supplies, or riding through town on a handsome bay gelding, or eating lunch at the small restaurant next to the hotel. He always nodded politely, sometimes tipped his hat, and occasionally stopped to exchange a few words about the weather or the town gossip. She learned, through bits of conversation and overheard discussions, that he had been a cavalry scout and horse wrangler before coming to Bonanza, that he had won his land money gambling in Denver, and that he was regarded as honest but dangerous, the sort of man you wanted on your side in a fight but would not want to cross. She also learned, though she tried not to pay attention, that several unmarried women in town had set their caps for him. Ruthie, one of the saloon girls, was particularly determined, and Katherine had seen her approach Thaddeus more than once in the street. He was always polite but never encouraging, and Ruthie always walked away looking disappointed. Katherine told herself she did not care who Thaddeus Thorne courted or married. She had more important things to worry about, like earning enough money to truly secure her place in Bonanza and perhaps, eventually, to save enough for a shop of her own. But she was lying to herself again. One Saturday morning in late June, Katherine was walking back from delivering a completed dress to the banker's wife when she heard the sound of hammering coming from the livery stable. Curious, she peered inside and saw Thaddeus working on what appeared to be a wagon wheel, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal corded forearms. He looked up as her shadow fell across the doorway. "Miss Carson, come to check on my handiwork." I heard hammering and was curious. "Wheel broke on my supply wagon yesterday. Cannot afford to pay someone to fix it right now, so I am doing it myself." He drove another nail home with practiced efficiency. "Every dollar I have is going into building materials. How is the ranch coming along?" Slowly. "Got the frame up for the stable, but I need help with the roof work. Hard to do that alone." He set down his hammer and wiped sweat from his forehead. "You ever been out of town, Miss Carson? Seen the countryside around here?" "No, I have not had time." "You should. It is beautiful country, especially in summer. Mountains on one side, grassland on the other. Good grazing land for horses." He picked up a canteen and took a long drink, and Katherine found herself watching the movement of his throat, then quickly looked away, embarrassed by her own interest. "I am sure it is lovely," she said, preparing to leave. "I could show you sometime if you would like. Tomorrow is Sunday. The hotel does not need you to work, does it?" Katherine's heart gave an unexpected leap. "Are you inviting me to visit your ranch, Mr. Thorne?" "I am." "It would be completely respectable. We would be back before dark, and I will have you in full view of town the whole ride. I just thought you might like to get out of Bonanza for a few hours, see something besides hotel rooms and laundry." She should say no. It was not proper to go riding unchaperoned with a man she barely knew, even in broad daylight. But something in his eyes, a hopefulness he was trying to hide, made her hesitate. "I do not have a riding habit," she said finally. "You do not need anything fancy, just dress practical. I will bring a gentle horse for you, one that would not spook if a butterfly landed on her nose." "What time?" A smile spread across his face, transforming it from handsome to genuinely beautiful. 9 o'clock. I will meet you in front of the hotel." "All right. Yes, I will be there." She walked back to the boarding house in a daze, half convinced she had lost her mind. She barely knew this man. Yes, he had been nothing but respectful, but what did she really know about him? He could be leading her out into the wilderness with bad intentions. But somehow, she did not believe that. There was something fundamentally decent about Thaddeus Thorne, something solid and trustworthy beneath the rough exterior. Or maybe she was just a fool, as her father used to say, too quick to see the best in people. That night, she lay awake for hours, alternating between excitement and anxiety. She finally fell asleep near dawn and woke with barely enough time to wash, dress in her most practical outfit, and pin her hair securely before rushing downstairs. Thaddeus was already waiting, holding the reins of 2 horses. One was his bay gelding and the other was a sweet-faced mare the color of honey. "Good morning," he said, and his smile was warm. "This is Buttercup. Do not let the name fool you. She is a steady girl. Used to belong to a rancher's daughter before he sold out and moved back east." Katherine approached slowly, letting Buttercup sniff her hand before stroking the mare's soft nose. "Hello, Buttercup. We are going to be friends, I think. You have ridden before, some. My father kept a small stable before he lost his business. I have not ridden in several years, though. It will come back to you. Thaddeus helped her mount, his hands careful and respectful as he guided her foot into the stirrup and steadied her until she was settled in the saddle. Comfortable? Yes, thank you. He swung onto his own horse with easy grace, and they started off at a walk through the town. It was early enough that the streets were mostly empty, though Katherine saw the curtain twitch in Mrs. Fletcher's front window and knew she would have questions to answer later. Once they left Bonanza behind, the landscape opened up spectacularly. Thaddeus had been right. It was beautiful. Mountains rose blue and purple in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow. Closer by, rolling grassland stretched in every direction, dotted with wildflowers and stands of cottonwood trees. The sky was so blue it hurt to look at, and the air smelled of sage and pine and growing things. "What do you think?" Thaddeus asked, watching her face. "It is magnificent." "I had no idea it was like this. You cannot tell from town. Most people never bother to look. They are too busy trying to scratch silver out of the ground to notice what is right in front of them." He pointed toward a cluster of buildings in the distance. "That is my place. Or what will be my place eventually." They rode closer, and Katherine could see the bones of what would someday be an impressive ranch. The stable frame was substantial, built to hold at least a dozen horses. Nearby, a small shelter served as Thaddeus's temporary home, rough but functional. Surveyor's stakes marked out where the main house would stand, on a slight rise with a view of both the mountains and the grassland. "I plan to raise horses here," Thaddeus said as they dismounted. "Good working horses, cavalry remounts, riding stock. There is a market for quality animals, and this land is perfect for it. Water from that creek, shelter from those trees, and enough grazing to support a good-sized herd." He showed her around, pointing out his plans, and Katherine found herself caught up in his enthusiasm. He had thought everything through carefully, from the placement of the corrals to the design of the house. It was clear this was not just a business venture for him, but a dream he had been nurturing for a long time. "Where will you get your starting stock?" she asked. "I have 3 mares already, good solid foundation animals. I bought them from a rancher down in New Mexico territory. They are boarding at the livery in town right now while I finish the stable. Once I get a decent herd established, I will bring in a quality stallion." He paused, looking out over the land. "I know it does not look like much now, but I can see what it will be. A real ranch with a proper house and full stables and horses grazing in those fields. Maybe a family someday." The last part was said quietly, almost to himself, but Katherine heard it. Something warm bloomed in her chest. They spent the next few hours exploring the property. Thaddeus showed her the creek, cold and clear and running fast with snowmelt from the mountains. They found deer tracks in the mud along the bank and saw an eagle circling overhead. He picked wildflowers and presented them to her with exaggerated gallantry that made her laugh, and she felt something inside her loosen, some tight knot of fear and grief that had been lodged in her chest since her father died. They ate lunch in the shade of the cottonwood trees, bread and cheese and apples that Thaddeus had packed in his saddlebags. Katherine found herself talking more freely than she had in months, telling him about her father's bookshop in Philadelphia, how they had loved reading together in the evenings, how his death had left her not just poor but terribly alone. "I am sorry you lost him," Thaddeus said. "My parents died when I was 16, yellow fever. It is a hard thing being alone in the world. Do you have any other family?" "A sister, last I heard. She married and moved to San Francisco. We have not been in touch in years." He leaned back against the tree trunk. "I was not a very good brother. I was angry after our parents died, angry at everything, and I took it out on anyone who got close. By the time I grew up enough to regret it, it was too late." "It is never too late," Katherine said softly. "You could write to her." "Maybe I will once I get the ranch established. Give me something worth writing about." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Katherine felt her breath catch. "You are easy to talk to, Miss Carson. I do not usually run my mouth like this." "I am glad you did." "And please call me Katherine." "Only if you call me Thaddeus," he smiled. "Or Thad if that is easier. Thaddeus suits you better." The ride back to Bonanza took longer than the ride out. Not because they hurried less, but because they stopped often, pointing out interesting rock formations or pausing to watch a hawk hunt. By the time they reached the hotel, the sun was beginning to sink toward the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Thaddeus helped Katherine dismount, and for a moment his hands lingered on her waist. They stood close, neither quite willing to step back, and Katherine wondered if he was going to kiss her. Part of her wanted him to, but he simply smiled, released her, and stepped back. "Thank you for coming today," he said. "It meant a lot to me, having someone to share it with." "Thank you for inviting me. I had a wonderful time. Could we do it again? Maybe next Sunday?" "I would like that." She watched him ride away, leading Buttercup, and her heart felt lighter than it had in months. She was so lost in thought that she did not notice Mrs. Fletcher waiting on the boarding house porch until she was almost at the steps. "You have been out riding all day with Thaddeus Thorne," Mrs. Fletcher said. "It was not a question." "Yes. He is a decent man, from what I hear. But you be careful, girl. You are new here and people talk. A woman's reputation is a fragile thing. We did nothing improper. He was a perfect gentleman." "I believe you, but not everyone will." Mrs. Fletcher's expression softened slightly. "I am not trying to scold you, Katherine. I just do not want to see you hurt. You have had enough hard knocks already." "I will be careful," Katherine promised. But as she climbed the stairs to her room, she realized she was not being careful at all. She was falling for Thaddeus Thorne, falling fast and hard despite every sensible reason not to. He was rough-edged and violent when necessary, a man with a past he did not talk about and a future that was far from certain. She barely knew him. And yet, she could not seem to stop thinking about him, about the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness in his calloused hands, the dreams he was building with sweat and determination. For the first time since her father died, she felt something other than fear and exhaustion. She felt hope. The next few weeks passed in a golden blur. Thaddeus and Katherine fell into a routine of spending Sundays together. Sometimes they rode out to his ranch, where Katherine would pack a picnic lunch and Thaddeus would show her the progress on his stables. Other times they explored the countryside, finding hidden meadows and clear streams, talking about everything and nothing. During the week, they saw each other in town, though they were careful to maintain propriety. Thaddeus would stop by the hotel in the evening after Katherine finished her cleaning work, and they would sit on the front porch in full view of passers-by, talking as the sun set. He brought her little gifts, nothing expensive but thoughtful. A smooth river stone she had admired during one of their rides, a book of poetry he found at the mercantile, a hair comb carved from pale wood. Katherine felt herself growing more attached with each passing day. Thaddeus was unlike any man she had ever known. He was strong and capable, yes, but also surprisingly gentle, with a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. He listened when she talked, really listened, and remembered details of conversations they had had weeks earlier. And he was courting her, quite deliberately, though he had never said the words aloud. She could see it in the way he looked at her, in the care he took to be respectful of her reputation, in the future he was building that seemed to have room for two. In mid-July, disaster struck. Katherine was cleaning one of the hotel rooms when the manager appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "Katherine, I am real sorry, but I have to let you go. The owner's nephew is coming to work here, and he wants your position." Katherine felt the floor tilt. "But I have been doing good work." "You said so yourself." "You have, and I mean that. But the owner wants his nephew employed, and I cannot say no. I will pay you through the end of the week. 3 days." She had 3 days of income left, and then nothing. The mending work helped, but it was not enough to pay for her room and food. She had been saving money, but not enough, not nearly enough. She finished the day in a daze, her mind racing through possibilities. She could try to find other cleaning work, but jobs were scarce. She could take in more sewing, but there was only so much mending in a town this size. She could write to her former employer in Philadelphia and beg for her old position back, but even if he agreed, the money for the return trip would exhaust her savings. That evening she sat on the hotel porch, staring at nothing when Thaddeus found her. "Katherine, what is wrong?" She told him about losing her job, trying to keep her voice steady. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker. "That is not right. You are the best worker they have. It does not matter. The owner wants to employ his nephew, and I cannot compete with family loyalty." Thaddeus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Marry me." Katherine's head snapped up. "What, marry me? I know we have not been courting long, and this is not how I wanted to ask, but marry me, Katherine. Come out to the ranch. I can provide for you. It would not be an easy life, not at first, but I swear I will work hard to make it a good one." "Thaddeus, you do not have to do this out of pity." "Pity," he laughed, a harsh sound. "Katherine, I have been half in love with you since I saw you at that fight, looking so fierce and out of place at the same time. Watching you these past weeks, getting to know you, I am all the way in love with you now. I was working up the courage to ask you proper, but I am asking now. Marry me. Not because you need a job, but because I need you." Katherine's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. "You love me." "I do. God help me, I do." He took her hand, his touch warm and rough and steady. "I know I am not much of a prize. I have a violent past and an uncertain future. But I promise you this. I will be faithful, and I will work every day to make you happy, and I will never give you cause to regret saying yes." She looked into his winter gray eyes and saw nothing but honesty. This man, this rough, scarred, gentle man, loved her, wanted her, was offering her not just security but a genuine partnership, a life built together. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." The smile that spread across his face was incandescent. He pulled her to her feet and into his arms, holding her close, and Katherine felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were good tears, happy tears. "When?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "As soon as possible. I do not have much time before I cannot pay for my room." "Tomorrow, then." "We will find the preacher first thing tomorrow morning." They were married the next day in a brief ceremony at the small church on the edge of town. Della Morris and Mrs. Fletcher stood as witnesses, both women smiling despite their surprise at the sudden wedding. Katherine wore her best dress, the gray one she had mended so carefully, with wildflowers in her hair that Thaddeus had picked that morning. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Thaddeus kissed her gently, reverently, and Katherine felt something shift deep inside her, some fundamental reordering of her world. She was no longer alone. She had a partner, a home, a future. After the ceremony, they loaded Katherine's trunk onto Thaddeus's wagon and rode out to the ranch. The stable was finished now, and the 3 mares grazed in the nearby pasture, their coats gleaming in the summer sun. The temporary shelter had been expanded slightly, with a real bed and a small stove and curtains Catherine had made from fabric scraps. "It is not much," Thaddeus said, suddenly awkward, "but we will build the house soon. I have been saving for materials, and with winter coming, we need something better than this." "It is perfect," Catherine said, and meant it. It was not the comfortable home Gerald Hutchins had promised her in his letters, but it was real, built by the hands of a man who loved her, and that made all the difference. That night, they consummated their marriage in the small bed, and Catherine discovered that physical intimacy with a man you loved was nothing like she had imagined. Thaddeus was patient and gentle, making sure she was comfortable, and when they finally came together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, two people who belonged together finding their way home. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the dark, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the horses moving in their stalls, the wind in the cottonwood trees, the distant call of an owl. "Are you happy?" Thaddeus asked softly. Catherine turned in his arms to look at his face, barely visible in the starlight filtering through the window. "Happier than I have been in a very long time, maybe happier than I have ever been. I will do everything I can to keep you that way. I know you will, and I will do the same for you." They fell asleep in each other's arms, and Catherine's last thought before unconsciousness claimed her was that she had come to Colorado covered in dust and doubt, expecting nothing, and had found everything. The next months were the hardest and happiest of Catherine's life. They worked from dawn until well past dark, building their future with their own hands. Thaddeus hired 2 men from town to help with the heavy construction on the house, and Catherine cooked for all of them, massive pots of stew and beans and fresh bread. In her spare moments, she worked on sewing projects for townspeople, building a reputation and a small income of her own. The house went up slowly but steadily. It was not large, just 4 rooms, a main living area with a kitchen, a bedroom, and 2 smaller rooms that Thaddeus said were for future children. Catherine blushed when he said it, but she liked the assumption, the confidence that they would have a family to fill those rooms. By October, the house was finished enough to move into, and Catherine spent a happy week arranging their few possessions and sewing curtains and making the space feel like a home. She planted bulbs near the front door for spring flowers and hung dried herbs from the kitchen rafters. Thaddeus built her a proper sewing table near the window where the light was best, and she worked there most evenings while he sat nearby reading or mending tack. They were building a life together, not just a house but a real life, full of work and laughter and quiet companionship. They had disagreements, of course. Thaddeus could be stubborn, and Catherine had a temper when pushed too far, and they both had moments of frustration with the endless labor required to keep the ranch running. But they learned to talk through their problems, to compromise, to apologize when they were wrong. And at night, in their bed in the house they had built together, they came together with increasing passion and tenderness, learning each other's bodies, discovering what gave pleasure and what deepened their connection. Catherine had never imagined marriage could be like this, a true partnership in every sense of the word. In November, Thaddeus brought home the stallion he had been saving for, a magnificent dark bay with a white star on his forehead. He was 3 years old, perfectly trained, with bloodlines that went back to the finest cavalry horses in the country. "His name is Ranger," Thaddeus said, his eyes alight with excitement. "With him and our mares, we can start breeding quality stock. In a few years, we will have foals to sell, and the ranch will really start paying for itself." Catherine watched the stallion prance in his new corral, tossing his head and snorting at the mares in the nearby pasture. "He is beautiful. You have a good eye for horses." "I have a good eye for quality in general," Thaddeus said, pulling her close and kissing her temple. "I picked you, did I not?" She laughed and elbowed him gently. Flatterer. But she was pleased, and she thought she would never tire of the way he looked at her, as if she was the most precious thing in his world. Winter came to Colorado with a vengeance that year. Snow fell heavily through December and January, piling in drifts that reached the eaves of the house. The work became harder, breaking ice in the water troughs twice a day, hauling extra hay to the horses, keeping the fires burning constantly. But the house was tight and warm, and Katherine had never felt more content. On Christmas morning, Thaddeus gave her a cameo brooch that had belonged to his mother, one of the few things he had kept from his old life. Katherine cried when she pinned it to her dress, touched beyond words by the gesture. She gave him a shirt she had sewn, made from fine cotton she had special ordered from Denver, with perfect seams and tiny embroidered initials on the cuff. "You did not have to go to such expense," he said, but she could tell he was pleased. "You are my husband. I wanted you to have something fine." They made love slowly that morning, the house quiet except for the crackle of the fire and their soft sounds of pleasure. And afterward, Katherine lay in Thaddeus's arms feeling utterly at peace. In February, Katherine realized she had not had her monthly courses since before Christmas. She waited another week to be sure, then told Thaddeus one evening as they sat by the fire. "I think I am pregnant." He went very still. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor, but yes, I think so." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. When he finally released her, there were tears in his eyes. "I am going to be a father," he said, his voice rough with wonder. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy." "Katherine, I am terrified and thrilled and more grateful than I can possibly say." "Yes, I am happy." They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about names and how they would rearrange the house and what they would need to buy. Thaddeus was almost giddy with excitement, and Katherine found his enthusiasm infectious. The pregnancy was not easy. Katherine suffered from terrible nausea in the early months, and as the baby grew, the physical strain made it hard to do the heavy ranch work she had been managing. Thaddeus would not let her overwork, insisting she rest frequently, and he hired a young man from town to help with the daily labor so Katherine could focus on lighter tasks. By summer, her belly was round and prominent, and she felt the baby moving constantly, little flutters and kicks that made her laugh. Thaddeus loved to put his hand on her stomach and feel the baby kick, his face filled with wonder each time. "You think it is a boy or a girl?" he asked one evening. "I think it is a baby," Katherine said, smiling. "That is all that matters. I just want both of you to be healthy. I do not care about anything else." In late August, on a sweltering afternoon when the heat made everything shimmer, Katherine's labor began. Thaddeus rode into town at breakneck speed to fetch the doctor and Mrs. Fletcher, who had experience as a midwife. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning, and there were moments when Thaddeus feared he would lose her, feared he would lose everything that mattered. But Katherine was strong, stronger than either of them had realized, and just as the sun rose on a new day, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The doctor placed the baby in Thaddeus's arms while Mrs. Fletcher tended to Katherine, and Thaddeus looked down at his son with tears streaming down his face. The baby was red and wrinkled and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. "He is beautiful," Thaddeus said hoarsely. "Katherine, he is beautiful." "Let me see him," Katherine said weakly, and Thaddeus brought the baby to her. She gathered him close, and the baby made small snuffling sounds, already rooting for milk. "What should we name him?" Thaddeus asked. Katherine looked up at him, her face exhausted but glowing. "I want to name him after my father, James. James Thorne." "James Thorne," Thaddeus repeated. "That is a good, strong name." They spent the first weeks of James's life in a haze of sleeplessness and wonder. The baby was a good infant, healthy and strong lunged, and Katherine took to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else. Thaddeus proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with James when he fussed at night, changing nappies without complaint, talking to the baby constantly even though James was far too young to understand. The ranch continued to thrive. The mares had produced 3 healthy foals that spring, beautiful animals that showed Rangers excellent bloodlines. Thaddeus sold 2 of them to the cavalry for a good price, and they used the money to buy more breeding stock and improve the ranch buildings. By the time James was a year old, toddling around the yard on unsteady legs and getting into everything, the ranch was firmly established. They had a dozen horses now, with more foals expected the next spring. Katherine had turned her sewing skills into a thriving business, taking orders not just from Bonanza but from surrounding towns. Women would travel hours to have Katherine make their wedding dresses and Sunday best. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, horses that got sick, accidents that cost time and money. Thaddeus broke his arm badly one year when a half-broken horse threw him, and Katherine had to manage the ranch alone for weeks while he healed. She discovered she was more capable than she had ever imagined, and Thaddeus was both humbled and proud to see her competence. When James was 3, Katherine became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. In the spring of 1883, she gave birth to a daughter they named Clara, a pretty baby with Katherine's blonde hair and Thaddeus's gray eyes. James was enchanted with his little sister, and Thaddeus declared himself the luckiest man in Colorado. Katherine, holding Clara while James chattered excitedly about teaching the baby to ride horses, thought she might be the luckiest woman. The years flowed past, marked by the seasons and the growth of their children and their ranch. James grew into a sturdy, serious boy who loved horses as much as his father did, while Clara was bright and curious, always asking questions and getting into mischief. They had one more child, another boy they named Thomas, born when Katherine was 30. The ranch prospered beyond Thaddeus's early dreams. They were known throughout Colorado for their quality horses, and buyers came from as far as Kansas and Wyoming to purchase their stock. They built an addition onto the house, added more stables, and hired regular help to manage the daily work. But no matter how busy they became, Thaddeus and Katherine made time for each other. They still took rides together when they could steal a few hours, just the 2 of them, remembering those early Sundays when they were falling in love. They still sat together in the evenings after the children were asleep, talking or reading or simply being in each other's presence. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thaddeus gave Katherine a gold locket with pictures of their 3 children inside. She gave him a leather-bound journal, knowing he had started writing down his memories and ranch records, wanting to leave something for their children to remember him by. "Have I told you lately that I love you?" Thaddeus asked that night as they lay in bed. "Not since this morning," Katherine teased. "I was beginning to wonder." "I love you, Katherine Thorne, more than the day I married you, which I would not have thought possible. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "You saved me," Katherine said softly. "When I came to Colorado, I was lost and afraid and alone. You gave me a home and a family and a life I never dared to dream of. I love you so much it frightens me sometimes. Then we are well matched, because you terrify me." The thought of losing you, of anything happening to you or the children, it keeps me up at night sometimes." "We are not going anywhere," Katherine said firmly. "We are going to grow old together, watching our children have children, annoying each other and being perfectly content." Thaddeus laughed and pulled her close. "That sounds perfect to me." And it was perfect as real life could be. They had their struggles and their sorrows. Catherine's mentor Della Morris passed away when Katherine was 35, and she grieved the loss of the woman who had given her a chance when she desperately needed one. Thaddeus's sister wrote after years of silence, and they began a cautious correspondence that eventually healed the rift between them. They had crop failures and sick animals and the constant challenges of ranch life, but through it all, they had each other. They had built something real and lasting, not just a ranch but a family, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. Katherine never forgot that journey to Colorado, covered in dust and doubt, expecting nothing good from a town called Bonanza. She never forgot the gray-eyed cowboy who had steadied her when she stumbled, who had seen something worth loving in a desperate seamstress with nothing to offer but determination and needle skills. Thaddeus had washed away her dust, and her doubt with patience and kindness and love. He had given her everything she needed, not material wealth but something far more valuable: a home, a partner, a reason to believe in happy endings. Years later, when their children were grown and married with children of their own, Katherine and Thaddeus would sit on their porch in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. James was running the ranch now, with his father's skill and his mother's determination. Clara had married a lawyer in Denver but visited often with her family. Thomas was learning to be a veterinarian, determined to combine his love of animals with his scientific mind. "We did well," Thaddeus would say, taking Katherine's hand. "We did very well," Katherine would agree. And they would sit in companionable silence, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life worth living, watching the sun set over the land they loved, together until the very end. On a warm spring morning when Katherine was 62 and Thaddeus was 64, they rode out to the meadow where he had first told her he loved her. The wildflowers were blooming, carpeting the ground in yellow and purple and blue, and the air smelled of sage and possibility. "Do you remember the first time we came here?" Katherine asked. "I remember every moment of it. You wore your gray dress, the one you had mended so carefully. You laughed when I picked you flowers, and I thought my heart would burst. I was so afraid then. Afraid of being alone, afraid of the future, afraid I had made a terrible mistake coming to Colorado. And now," Katherine looked at her husband, this man who had been her partner and lover and best friend for over 40 years. His hair was white now, and his face was weathered with age, but his eyes were still that clear winter gray, still looking at her with the same love and wonder he had shown that day so long ago. "Now I know that coming to Colorado was the best thing I ever did. Meeting you, building a life with you, raising our children together. It has been the greatest privilege of my life." Thaddeus leaned over and kissed her gently. "The privilege has been mine, Katherine Thorne, every single day of it." They rode back to the ranch hand in hand, and if their pace was slower than it had been 40 years earlier, if the ride tired them more than it once would have, neither of them minded. They had all the time in the world, and they were spending it exactly as they wished together. That night, as they prepared for bed in the house they had built with their own hands, Katherine caught sight of herself in the mirror. She was old now, her face lined with decades of sun and work, her hair more silver than gold. But she did not regret a single moment, a single choice that had brought her to this place. She thought of the frightened young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach in Bonanza, covered in dust and doubt, expecting nothing and prepared for hardship. She wished she could tell that young woman not to be afraid, that everything was going to be all right, better than all right. She wished she could tell her that the rough-looking cowboy who would catch her elbow and steady her when she stumbled would become the love of her life. That together, they would build something beautiful and lasting. But that young woman had found her way without reassurance, had taken a chance on love and been rewarded beyond measure. And now, all these years later, Katherine could look back on her life with satisfaction and joy, knowing that every hardship had been worth it. Every struggle had led her exactly where she needed to be. Thaddeus came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "What are you thinking about?" "I am thinking about how lucky I am, how lucky we are." "I think about that every day," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Come to bed, my love. We have another day of work tomorrow." Katherine turned in his arms and kissed him properly. "Another day together. That is all I need." They climbed into bed, and as Katherine settled into Thaddeus's arms in the darkness, listening to the familiar night sounds of their ranch, she felt complete peace. She had come to Colorado covered in dust and doubt, a mail-order bride who never got to meet her intended groom. Instead, she had found something far better: true love, real partnership, and a life beyond her wildest dreams. The cowboy had washed away her dust and her doubt, and in return she had given him her heart, her loyalty, and her unwavering devotion. Together, they had built a legacy that would endure long after they were gone, children and grandchildren who would carry their love forward into the future. And as sleep claimed her, Katherine's last conscious thought was one of profound gratitude for the journey that had brought her here, for the man who held her, and for the life they had created together, one day at a time, one moment of love and work and dedication at a time. It was, she thought as she drifted off, the perfect ending to a story that had started with such uncertainty. Not a fairy tale ending, but something better. A real one, earned through effort and commitment and the simple choice, made every day for over 40 years, to love and be loved in return. Their story was complete, their circle closed, their legacy secure. The mail-order bride who had arrived covered in dust and doubt had found her home, her family, and her forever love. And the cowboy who had washed both away had found the same, building with his bride a life of meaning and purpose and enduring devotion. Years passed in gentle rhythm after that spring day in the meadow. Katherine and Thaddeus watched their grandchildren grow, attended weddings and christenings, and took pride in seeing the ranch continue to flourish under James's capable management. They moved into a smaller house on the property, a comfortable cottage where they could live more simply while still being close to family. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered for a celebration that lasted 3 days. Children and grandchildren came from across Colorado and beyond, filling the ranch with laughter and love. James stood up at the anniversary dinner and raised his glass. "To my parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You taught us that love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every day. You showed us what real partnership looks like, what commitment means. Everything good in my life traces back to the two of you and the example you set. Thank you for loving each other, for loving us, and for building something that will last for generations." Katherine cried, and Thaddeus had to clear his throat several times before he could speak. When he did, his voice was strong despite his age. "Your mother came to Colorado alone and afraid, and I was a drifter with nothing but dreams and determination. We found each other when we both needed it most, and we built this life together, one day at a time. The lesson I hope you all take from our story is this: Do not be afraid to take chances on love, to work hard for what matters, and to hold tight to the people who make your life worth living. Katherine is the best chance I ever took, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Later that night, after the festivities had ended and the house was quiet, Katherine and Thaddeus sat on their porch watching the stars. 50 years, Katherine said wonderingly. "It feels like both forever and no time at all." "I know what you mean. Sometimes I still see that young woman stepping off the stagecoach, covered in dust and looking so lost. And then I blink and here you are, the love of my life, the mother of my children, my partner in everything. Do you have any regrets?" "Not a single one." "You?" Katherine thought about it carefully, then shook her head. "No. I wish my father could have known you, could have seen the life we built. I wish some of the hard times had been easier. But regrets? No. Every choice I made led me to you, and I would not change that for anything." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands as they had for 50 years, watching the night sky and listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for sleep. It was a perfect moment, one of thousands they had shared, and Katherine tried to memorize every detail. The rough warmth of Thaddeus's hand in hers, the familiar scent of horses and hay and home, the brilliant scatter of stars overhead. When Thaddeus was 70, he began to slow down more noticeably. His joints ached in the mornings, and the work that had once been effortless became difficult. Katherine, too, felt the weight of her years, though she stubbornly continued her sewing work, her hands still steady despite the arthritis that had begun to creep into her fingers. They adapted, as they always had. James took on more of the physical ranch work, and his eldest son, another Thaddeus, showed every sign of continuing the family legacy. Katherine taught her granddaughters to sew, passing on skills that had saved her life all those years ago. They made time for what mattered: family dinners, quiet evenings together, watching sunsets and remembering the past while celebrating the present. On a golden afternoon in October, when Katherine was 71 and Thaddeus was 73, they took one last ride together. James saddled their gentlest horses, older animals that moved at a sedate pace, and helped his parents mount. Katherine saw the worry in her son's eyes but waved it away. "We will be fine. We are just going to the meadow and back." "I will expect you back before dark," James said. "No wandering off on adventures." Thaddeus grinned. "At our age, I think our adventure days are behind us." But as they rode slowly through the familiar landscape, Katherine thought that every day with Thaddeus had been an adventure, whether they were building a ranch from nothing or simply sitting together in comfortable silence. The grandest adventures, she had learned, were not always the most dramatic. Sometimes they were simply choosing to love someone, day after day, year after year, through joy and hardship and everything in between. They reached the meadow, and the wildflowers were blooming in a final burst of color before winter set in. They dismounted, moving carefully, and spread a blanket in the sun. For hours they sat together, talking and remembering, laughing at old stories and marveling at how much life they had packed into the years since that fateful day when Katherine arrived in Bonanza. "I want you to know something," Thaddeus said, as the sun began to sink toward the horizon. "These 53 years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. Everything good I am, everything I have accomplished, it is because of you. You made me want to be better, to build something lasting. You gave me a reason to put down roots and fight for a future. I love you more than words can possibly express, Katherine Thorne, and I always will." Katherine felt tears slip down her cheeks. "And I love you, Thaddeus. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You gave me home and family and purpose. You showed me what real love looks like. I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Cannot imagine who I would have become if we had never met. You are my great love, my partner, my everything." They kissed as the sun set. Two old people who loved each other as deeply as they had when they were young, perhaps more deeply, because they knew how rare and precious their connection was. When they finally rode back to the ranch, the stars were beginning to emerge, and they guided their horses by familiar paths through the darkness. James was waiting on the porch, relief evident on his face. "I was about to come looking for you." "We are fine," Katherine said. "Just taking our time." That night, Katherine and Thaddeus made love one last time, slowly and carefully, their bodies aged but their desire for each other undimmed. Afterward, they lay together in the darkness, and Thaddeus stroked Katherine's hair with gentle fingers. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For everything. For saying yes. For building this life with me. For every day, every moment, thank you." "The thanks are mine," Katherine said. "All mine." They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had for 53 years. Thaddeus died peacefully in his sleep that night, his heart simply stopping after more than 7 decades of faithful service. Katherine woke at dawn to find him gone, and though she wept, though her heart broke with the loss, she also felt a strange sense of peace. He had lived a full life, had died content and surrounded by love, and he had slipped away without pain or fear. The funeral brought family and friends from across Colorado. Thaddeus was remembered as a good man, an excellent horseman, a devoted father, and a loving husband. Katherine stood dry-eyed through the service, holding her children's hands, drawing strength from the legacy they had built together. After Thaddeus was buried on the ranch, on the hill overlooking the meadow where they had shared so many happy moments, Katherine retreated to the cottage for several weeks. Her children worried about her, but she assured them she was all right. She just needed time to adjust to this new reality. In truth, she was talking to Thaddeus, telling him about her day, asking his opinion on family matters, remembering their life together. She felt his presence still, not in any ghostly sense, but in the home they had made, the family they had raised, the love that had shaped every corner of their world. Katherine lived for 3 more years after Thaddeus died. They were quiet years, spent with family, teaching grandchildren and great-grandchildren, completing sewing projects, and tending the garden she had planted decades earlier. She never remarried, never even considered it. She had had her great love, and nothing could ever replace that. On a spring morning very like the one when she had ridden to the meadow with Thaddeus for the last time, Katherine woke feeling peaceful and ready. She was 74 years old, and she was tired. Not unhappy, but tired in the bone-deep way that comes from a long life fully lived. She spent the day saying goodbye, though no one realized it. She hugged each of her children and told them she loved them. She held her youngest great-grandchild and told the baby stories the child would never remember but Katherine needed to tell. She went through her sewing things and set aside her best needles and thread for her granddaughter, who showed the most promise with textile work. That evening, she walked slowly to Thaddeus's grave on the hill and sat beside it, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "I am coming to you, my love," she said softly. "I have missed you every day, but I stayed because our children needed me, because our grandchildren needed their grandmother. But I am ready now, ready to see you again, ready to rest." She talked to him as the sun sank below the horizon, telling him about all the little things he had missed, assuring him that the ranch was thriving, that their great-grandchildren were being raised with the same values they had instilled in their own children. "We did good work, you and I," she said as the first stars appeared. "Real good work, and now I am ready to stop working and just be with you again." Katherine died that night in her sleep, peacefully with a smile on her face. Her family found her in the morning, looking serene and somehow younger, as if death had smoothed away the years and returned her to the woman she had been when she first loved Thaddeus Thorne. They buried her next to her husband on the hill, and at her request, they planted wildflowers on both graves. Within a few years, the hillside bloomed every spring with the same colors that had filled the meadow where they had fallen in love, a living testament to a love that had endured through 53 years of marriage and beyond. The ranch continued for generations, passed down through the Thorne family, each generation adding their own chapter to the story while honoring the foundation Katherine and Thaddeus had built. The original house became a cherished family museum, preserved exactly as Katherine had left it, and every new generation learned the story of the mail-order bride who arrived covered in dust and doubt, and the cowboy who washed both away with patience and love. It became a family legend, a touchstone they returned to in times of struggle or doubt. When marriages faltered, they remembered Katherine and Thaddeus's commitment to each other. When times were hard, they remembered the determination with which their ancestors had built something from nothing. When love seemed impossible, they remembered that Katherine and Thaddeus had found each other against all odds and made it work through sheer will and devotion. The story of their love rippled forward through time, influencing lives they would never know, inspiring choices they would never witness. And in that way, Katherine and Thaddeus lived on, not just in their descendants but in the example they had set, the proof that love could conquer doubt, that partnership could overcome any obstacle, that two people with nothing but determination and devotion could build a legacy that would endure for generations. The mail-order bride had arrived covered in dust and doubt, expecting nothing, prepared for hardship. The cowboy had washed both away with gentle hands and patient love. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of taking chances and choosing love, even when the future is uncertain and the path unclear. And that legacy, that love, that life they built together, became the bedrock on which generations built their own happiness, proving that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a step into the unknown, and the greatest treasures are found when we are brave enough to reach for them, dust, doubt, and all.